Good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Moira O'Brien, and I have the pleasure of being the Dean of Science here at the University of Melbourne. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special event on behalf of the Faculty of Science. And I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on this evening, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. I also acknowledge the traditional owners and First Nations people of the lands from which our online audience is joining us. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are Australia's first scientists and farmers with deep and enduring knowledges of the skies, lands and waters. And I pay particular respect to elders past and present and all First Nations people joining us here this evening or online. Public lectures are a long-standing tradition in universities around the world. They enable us to share the latest discoveries, ideas and innovations and to stimulate community discussion and debate on society's most pressing challenges with the hope that collectively we can solve these challenges. Tonight's lecture is about the future of food, which will shape the future of humanity. Many of you know that I grew up in the Mallee region in northwest Victoria, where my grandparents had a wheat farm and my father was a shearer and managed the community large-scale grain storage over the summer, and that was where I had my first job. So from an early age, I have been keenly aware of the many challenges faced by food producers and farming communities. And these challenges are increased in the face of climate change, biodiversity loss and biosecurity risks. And our faculty is tackling these threats and challenges through world-class and frequently world-leading scientific research in education. And we do this in close collaboration with diverse industries and communities across Australia and, just as importantly, around the world. The head of our School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences, Professor Giovanni Tocchini, has defined the school's mission beautifully, so I will quote from him. We envisage a future in which ecosystems thrive, agriculture is sustainable and food systems are healthy, a world aligned with the collective well-being of nature and people, a world where environments and communities flourish. Our mission is to nurture new knowledge, strengthen capabilities and transform systems in agriculture, food and ecosystem sciences. Tonight's lecturer shares this mission and is driving it at the global level through academic discourse, policy reform and international development. I have the great pleasure and privilege of introducing our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Lindiwe Sibanda. Lindiwe is a world leader in food security, climate resilience and sustainable agriculture, and we are deeply honoured to have her with us. With a career rooted in Africa, she is shifting global food systems towards greater equity and sustainability by championing emissions reduction, climate adaptation strategies, improved land and water management, and the integration of ecology and agriculture. Lindiwe has held pivotal roles in international organisations, including the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, where she shared policy frameworks to address global hunger, food system resilience, and smart climate agriculture. She has served as chair of the Board of Trustees for the International Livestock Research Institute and contributed to high-level advisory groups on international policies, investment strategies and research policies. And these include roles in the African Union, the United Nations agencies and leading philanthropic and scientific institutions. She is frequently featured in media, including being a regular commentator for The Guardian, BBC and Al Jazeera. An influential advocate, Lindiwe bridges the gap between research and real-world application, pushing policymakers and global audiences to focus on assisting marginalised smallholders to access sustainable commercial options. She has also been a great supporter and collaborator at the University of Melbourne. She has been instrumental in directing top Kenyan PhD candidates to work with us in the area of agriculture. She has collaborated with Professor Richard Eckhart on groundbreaking research into ruminant carbon and emissions, and she has generously shared her expertise at previous presentations here, and her passion and dedication are endlessly inspiring. Following Lindiwe's lecture, there will be time for questions and answers. So please scan the QR code that should be on the screen now. You can add your questions as the lecture's going along, and there'll be plenty of time at the end to answer them. So this will take you to a Slido page, and just do your thing. I'm sure you're all excited to hear the lecture, so without any more delay, please join me in welcoming Lindiwe.
Thank you. Allow me to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we are meeting on this evening, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. I also acknowledge the First Nations peoples who are joining us online or in person. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are Australia's first scientists and farmers with deep and enduring knowledge of their country. They wisely secured their people's food supplies across a vast range of ecosystems and thousands of generations through sophisticated and sustainable land and water management and aquaculture and agriculture practices. I pay my deepest respects to elders, past and present, and I welcome all First Nations people here this evening. Thank you. Professor Moira O'Brien, Dean of Science, thank you for welcoming me so warmly. It's always a joy to come to Melbourne. Thanks to Professor Frank Danche, who invited me to deliver the Professor Gordon Bill McClymont Memorial Lecture last year on the sidelines of the 2024 Combined Asia-Australian Animal Production and the Australian Association of Animal Sciences meeting. Allow me to acknowledge my elders, both the departed and present. Let me start with Professor Derek Tribe, a giant who was once chair of the Faculty of Agriculture here at the University of Melbourne, who also was instrumental in the setting up of ILRAD, now ILRI, which is one of the global consultative international agriculture research centers that produce public goods for research and development worldwide. To the living, Professor Emeritus and Nobel Laureate Peter Doherty, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for continuing to serve. Thank you for your humanity. And of course, your light-hearted spirit. You continue to inspire me. To Professor Emeritus Lindsay Falvey, thank you for the good work you are doing globally and here in Australia. And Professor Richard Eckhart, we are in the trenches together and we continue to conquer. Thank you. For all others in attendance, members of the Faculty of Science, university staff, students, general public, all who have interest in agriculture, food security, and sustainable systems, and my family who've traveled to be with me, both here physically and online, thank you for accompanying me on this journey. It is a special honor to stand here at the University of Melbourne, a world-class institution whose scientific excellence has shaped agricultural innovation far and beyond Australia's borders, including across the African continent, where my work is mainly rooted. Today, I invite you into a story about sustainable food systems, society, and the seeds of change that each generation must plant. Hence the title, Seeds of Change, Cultivating Tomorrow's Sustainable Food System Leaders Today. This is not just a lecture. It is a conversation about partnerships. It is a conversation about bold investments in scientific research and development. It is a story about leadership with courage and the kind of future that we dare to imagine for our children. I hope to walk you through a 7-chapter series and keep you awake as I'm struggling with jet lag myself. In this public lecture, I will talk about why food matters now. I'll then walk you through the history of the agricultural revolutions that we have fought. I'll zero in on Australia's contribution to this fight and come closer to home and share my experiences through the Jericho Wheel, and then go to a happy space of how we can create shared value and create biohappiness through sustainable food systems, and end off with a call to action. Can we reimagine a world where everybody is equipped to do something about sustainable food systems? Not only the elite who walk through the corridors of this university, but everybody who has a stake in the business of food has potential to transform food systems and make them sustainable. So, why food systems matter and why now? We live in a moment where food systems touch everything from health, climate, equity, jobs, culture, and even geopolitics. The evidence is very clear. 1 in 3 people globally is malnourished, and malnourished being a broad term we use either for the undernourished, the overnourished, and those deficient in micronutrients, where over 70% of the non-communicable diseases are now diet-related. In a world where agriculture and food systems contribute 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, leading to climate change. Yet, paradoxically, agriculture still employs a significant share of rural populations, especially the youth. Food systems are where our greatest challenges meet our greatest opportunities. I want to believe we cannot fix what we do not understand. And therefore, we need to go back to history and unpack previous revolutions in agriculture to the current and learn what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and what do we do going forward. We've had 4 revolutions, and we are now in what we call agriculture 4.0. We've evolved from agriculture to food security to sustainable food systems, where agriculture feeds the soil, food security feeds the stomach, but sustainable food systems must feed both people and the planet without stealing from the future. That's what sustainability is all about. We live in an era of paradox. We produce enough food to feed the world, yet hunger still persists. Climate change is intensifying through droughts, through floods, and heat waves, threatening livelihoods everywhere, particularly farmers' livelihoods. Agriculture itself is both a victim, and yet it can be a useful contributor to averting the climate crisis. biodiversity is declining at alarming rates, and diet-related diseases are rising, even as the malnutrition remains widespread. This is not just a food problem, it is a systems problem. And unless we address it systematically, we'll fail to achieve sustainable development goals, from eradicating poverty to securing our planet and health. Within this crisis lies an opportunity, for there is no country that has ever developed without first developing its agriculture. Agriculture remains the most powerful lever to lift people out of poverty. It is the most powerful lever to empower women and to empower farmers and the next generation, our youth. It is the most powerful lever to stabilize societies. That's why we call it food security. Let me walk you through quickly these four revolutions that we've gone through. Revolution 1, the Neolithic shift. As you can see from the picture, we evolved from hunter-gatherers to sustainable food systems, demonstrating how humanity's relationship with food is more than a practical necessity. It is a 10,000-year story of innovation, resilience, and adaptation. Our evolution mirrors our food systems. We moved from survival to stability to abundance, and now, by necessity, to sustainability. And each agricultural revolution not only changed how we farm, but fundamentally reshaped how we live, how we govern, how we trade, and how we thrive. If we look at the birth of agriculture by domesticating plants and animals, we established permanent settlements, we built granaries, we kept livestock, created the earliest versions of structured food systems. There was surplus food, but these early gains came with trade-offs. Higher population densities, new diseases, social stratification, and dependence on a narrower range of crops than exists in the world now. But this revolution gave us architecture on which every future transformation would stand. And it taught us that how we farm determines how we live. The second revolution, between 17th and 19th century, humanity entered a second wave of agricultural transformation. This period introduced systematic crop rotation, selective breeding, enclosure of farmland, early fertilizers, and mechanization. Agriculture shifted from subsistence activity to a productive, increasingly scientific enterprise. The consequences were profound. We got surplus food. This enabled labor to leave the land. Cities grew. Food markets and global trade expanded. For the first time, our societies could imagine not just feeding themselves, but building economies around agricultural productivity. Yet, even with these gains, food security remained uneven. Famines persisted. Where political systems were fragile, they became inequitable. Productivity alone could not overcome discrimination, conflict, or poor governance. The lesson from that phase was unmistakable. Agriculture can drive prosperity, but only strong institutions and inclusive governance can turn productivity into food security. The third revolution is the famous, maybe infamous, Green Revolution that is mainly spoken about. This is the revolution that fed billions. The mid-20th century brought a turning point that would reshape global demographics. Faced with predictions of mass starvation, the world responded with science. The Green Revolution, mainly driven by the consultative group of international agriculture centers, such as CIMMYT, headquartered in Mexico, which was driving maize and wheat, and Erie in the Philippines, where common names you hear are Norman Borlaug, who was working mainly out of CIMMYT, and for India, the father of the Green Revolution, Swaminathan. They unleashed high-yielding varieties. The governments responded with irrigation technologies, fertilizers, and crop protection innovations. The impact was extraordinary. High yields of rice, wheat, and maize tripled in many regions. Asia averted a catastrophic famine. India transitioned from food aid dependency to self-sufficiency. Global life expectancy increased. Sadly, this revolution did not get to Africa yet. The third green revolution is still an aspiration. There was a downside to this revolution. It exposed the limits of quantity-focused paradigm, where we were dreaming calories to feed the stomach, but not to nourish the stomach and the body and the planet. It resulted in soil degradation and water depletion, loss of biodiversity, chemical overuse, nutrient-poor, staples-based diets, and a global surge in obesity and diet-related diseases, all because of food. So, in brief, the Green Revolution solved the calorie problem, but created a new problem. The quality and sustainability of our food systems were damaged. From agriculture to food security to nutrition and sustainable food systems, this is the journey that we are in now. If you look at all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, all of them have something to do with food. All of them have something to do with sustainable food systems, either through the biosphere, society, the economy, but most important, through partnerships. Food security requires more than just availability. It demands affordability, access, stability, and dignity. Nutrition is now the defining measure of success. Stunting, anemia, obesity, and non-communicable diseases reveal that our food systems are not just failing to feed people, but they are failing to nourish them. Agriculture, as I've said, is contributing to climate change, with 33% of the global greenhouse emissions coming from agriculture. Our diets are driving up to 60% of the environmental degradation, and what we are ending up with, malnourished people and a poorly managed environment. Culture and consumer behavior shape what people eat, and climate change threatens every stage of the chain. Then comes the question, are we producing the right foods? Are we nourishing people? Are we regenerating or degrading ecosystems? Who benefits and who is left behind? Can the system be sustained for future generations? In this whole journey of the fourth revolution, which is driven by digitals, we are aiming to nourish people and the planet. And I want to say Australia has been in the forefront globally in that journey. Let me just highlight some of the innovations that have been generated out of Australia. The first, one that is closest to my heart, because it happened in my own village, was a technology that was generated by funding through ASEA, through CSIRO, who developed a mechanism for moisture assessment in an irrigation system. What you see on the right is the traditional irrigation system where water is wasted, and when families, women, spending long days waiting for water to be released, water which is limited in quantity. What the researchers did was to develop a technology which measures the amount of moisture in the soil, communicates through the device on the right, and farmers get to deliver just the right amount of water per crop. That way you are saving on water, but you're saving on the time the women were spending waiting for water that was then wasted. So this is one of the breakthrough innovations. And what was exciting for me was to see this innovation appearing last year in the top 6 Food Planet Prize, which is a $2 million prize that's awarded out of Sweden, and Australia was there in the top 6. That just says a lot about the contribution of research, R&D, and what partnerships can deliver. This technology is now being used in Africa and Asia, and a manufacturing plant has been set out of South Africa to deliver on this. I can say a lot about the contribution of Australia through the CGIAR. And if we go through what's been done, strengthen global agricultural research capacity. As you can see through all those centers, Australia has been there working with scientists, providing scientists, partnerships with the national agriculture systems. Flagship transformation, particularly the drought-tolerant maize. If you go to South Africa, that is the big landmark of what has been delivered through investments in research and development. Human capital. It's rare in Southern and East Africa not to come across someone who's been trained through support by ASEA, which is the Australian arm in development. And it was interesting last year at a trade show in Zimbabwe, we came across a gentleman wearing an ASEA t-shirt, and he said he was a PhD holder, having graduated from this university. So the footprint is worldwide. The outcomes are that through R&D, countries are helping, particularly the developing countries, to evolve, and most of these countries have graduated to have leaders who are either in policy position or leading research stations because of the investment that was made through the partnership with Australia. So there's a lot to be proud about. But unfortunately, we're living at a time where funding is dwindling. So we have to look at other options of how do we maintain these partnerships. That takes me to my own story, the Jericho Wheel. I thought it's best to present this in the form of a wheel, where you start and where you end, and what I've learned in this journey. Why a wheel? It shows leadership as secular. We are often told that the journey is a straight line, but rarely do you find straight line in development. It is a secular, if anything, it's a broken route. This wheel reveals the patterns, transitions, and reinvention points that we go through as leaders in our quest to achieve a desired impact. It supports deep reflection and self-awareness, which is important for leaders to have, and it turns a lifetime of leadership into simple and a visual narrative. What you see in the center is my full-time job as a farmer. I'm glad to say a couple of Australians have been to Zimbabwe and have visited the farm, and I'll welcome any of you who want to visit. Being in Australia, I'm proud to say I'm a livestock farmer. I'm even prouder when I say this in countries that don't have much respect for beef production, because it's important that we invest and protect the production of beef systems, because there are other people without a choice. I'll quickly walk you through this Jericho journey that I have traveled, just to show you the value of partnerships, the value of investment in research and development, and the value of intentional leadership in terms of transformation of food systems. When I look at my education, I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't from the investments that were made by bilateral partnerships. I got my first degree from the University of Alexandria in Egypt, where I spent 4 wonderful years, thanks to the government of Egypt that gave a scholarship to the government of Zimbabwe when we attained independence in 1980. That just shows the value of partnerships, bilateral support. I then went on to the University of Reading, and thanks to the Canadians who had started what was called the GOAT Productivity Improvement Project in Zimbabwe, For those who may not know, my PhD was on goat production, improving the indigenous goat. How I got there is that at the time, Zimbabwe did not have any work that had been done on indigenous animals. They were seen as backward. They didn't need to be improved because most of the researchers had been trained overseas, and we were looking at exotic animals. But I had this quest that my grandmother used to give me 20-gram piece of meat once a day. And I said, when I grow up, I'll make my own goats, farm, and eat more meat. But unfortunately, I now eat less for diet reasons. But the beauty of that partnership is that it allowed me to work on goats and improve the productivity of indigenous goats as far back as 1991. And that thesis has remained the reference thesis, thanks to the partnership of the Ghanaian government, the UK government, and the government of Zimbabwe in that partnership. I am proud to be working on livestock, and this public lecture cannot be complete without a shout out of why livestock are important. 1.7 billion people depend on livestock, not just for eating meat, but as a livelihood. 60% of our rural households in the developing countries rely on livestock for their economic security. You're looking at people and countries, some of whose GDP, gross domestic productivity, is up to 40% derived from livestock. So why should we ignore livestock? It's not only for beef, it is a source of livelihood for people who don't have any other choice, but all they have known is raising livestock. However, there are problems. We are seeing problems of antimicrobial resistance. We are seeing problems with the recurrent droughts. And that is why it's important that we invest in R&D for livestock. If you look at the most commonly traded products, if we look at this as a commodity, the top 5 are livestock. You have pigs, you have cattle in terms of beef, you have meat, all in the top 4, and you have milk, well above your rice, wheat, and maize. That says a lot. No agriculture or sustainable food systems topic should be discussed without talking about the value of livestock as a source of livelihood. We also look at where this livestock production is happening. 72% in Africa are smallholder farmers. When you're a smallholder farmer, you have about 1 hectare at the most of land, but you are relying on livestock. So can you imagine the sort of technologies you need to leapfrog development, be it diseases, nutrition, genetics, particularly in a climate-challenged environment? All this is a big shout out for the International Livestock Research Institute, which is the global center that is driving the public goods innovations for improving productivity of our livestock. I went on when I had graduated to understand my terrain, which is Zimbabwe. Funny enough, we have Macpherson Consulting Rural Development Group, an Australian firm that I joined after a couple of years in Zimbabwe University. It is not by coincidence that they're Australian, but I thought I would give them a shout out because that's where I got my first grounding, that after university, go back to the people, the farmers. I got to understand rural development. From there, I established my own firm, Lin's Agricultural Services, and went into full-time farming. My real awakening in the development sector was in policy, where I joined the Food, Agriculture, Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network. It's a mouthful that only those who have worked there can pronounce. This is an interesting network. It brings government, private sector, research organizations, mainly universities, private sector, and then women and youth. But what is unique is that there are very few networks where government sits in. And because it's a policy network, I got to understand that the business of policy development is not only for economists, which is what I had been made to understand when I went to school. we should all put our hands into policy, because unless you understand policy, unless you inform policy using research evidence, you will have a challenge because you cannot take your technologies to scale. The biggest drivers for scaling technologies are private sector and a conducive policy environment. But unfortunately, we always leave policy development to the policymaker, the politician, and the economists who generate the analysis. Yet those most affected by the problems should be the best messengers for policy development. For those who have not dirtied their hands, I thought I would scare you. Policy development is messy. For us in livestock sciences, it's like sausage making. Can you imagine all those players trying to fight? They're always winners or losers. It's either the smallholder farmer will win or the big farmer will win. But the politician is the one who calls the shot in terms of deciding who wins, who loses. But our role as researchers is to always generate the evidence that's undiluted. And what I learned is that the best is to equip those most affected by the problem with the message so that they advocate for policy change. We generated a tool which we called Theatre for Policy Action. This is where we went to villages and we diagnosed the problem. And one of the problems was that most of our researchers had lost the ear for understanding the problem that our farmers were facing. Through policy for theatre advocacy, we're able to put into a theoretical enactment an understanding of what is the problem, analyze it, come back to the farmers, equip them with the messages, and they develop the scripts where policymakers would attend, but with an ear of finding solutions. The greatest game changers there were journalists, because we brought journalists who got the stories into the national news, and once a politician appears in the national news, rest assured policy will change. So those are some of the tricks that we developed to influence policy change that I would have never known about as an animal scientist had I not gone dirty into the business of policy making. The next thing was to link local policies to global. You cannot scale if you stay local. So one of the challenges we have had is the issue of climate change. Africa has been fighting for funds for climate adaptation. But I think the mistake we made was always to say, we did not cause the damage, so those who caused the damage must pay, and we have no business in mitigation. We have now invested in research, and University of Melbourne is also leading in partnership with ILRI in generating evidence that we can mitigate climate change through agriculture, particularly in the livestock sector. And with that evidence, we go in and say agriculture is a solution. It can mitigate climate change, therefore give us money to develop our livestock and agriculture systems in a way that will not cause more emissions, but that will be climate smart. So that is part of the narrative advocacy that I've learned over the years, thanks to the partners that I've worked with in terms of refining my understanding of how do you play the game of influence? How do you use your science with the right messaging to make a transformation of food systems, but most important, impact? So those are some of the organizations I've worked with. With all this, this takes me to global wicked problems. Wicked problems are a headache to policymakers. There is no one ministry that's in charge of nutrition, because nutrition cuts across Ministry of Education, you have to know how to wash your hands and have clean water, cuts across Ministry of Agriculture, where the food is produced to nourish people, cuts across environment, cuts across health. Therefore, there's always confusion in terms of who will guide the policies. The same with climate change. So these are the wicked problems that have set us back in our agriculture food systems transformation. And unless we understand them, it's very difficult to influence. I've highlighted there what makes nutrition and climate change wicked. That's why after 30 United Nations Conference of Party conferences, the COPs, we're at COP30, we still don't have a narrative on agriculture, on climate-smart agriculture in the resolutions, because no one owns it. It's a wicked problem, yet we all understand food. I've highlighted the different influences in nutrition, the different pathways, the production, women empowerment, education. And unfortunately, when we talk nutrition, no matter how educated you are, you're not always good at eating right. Your culture and other issues come into play. So how do we get things right? Go back to statistics I've shared. That's a wicked problem. We are failing to find solutions. Yet, we are in the game of sustainable food systems. I want to put it across that it's because we have not armed enough people to fight this war. We know what is missing. Children are dying from undernourishment. 50% of the deaths of under 5 are attributed to malnutrition, and yet we fail to put the right policies in place. Most recently, the Eat Lancet report produced clear recommendations of what's to be done. Question is, who's going to do it? We always look at those who've been trained, those who understand, yet food is the business of everybody. I just wanted to say there is a prize, the $2 million prize that we've put up for Food Planet Prize, where we are looking for technologies to leapfrog the solution of food systems transformation. We need more technologies. For any development and transition of sustainable food systems, we'll need human power, we'll need technologies, and we'll need capital. So someone's got to be generating those technologies. And I'm looking up to universities to be doing that, and public institutions like CGIAR. There's also the issue of anticipatory science. I've recently joined GESDA, which is the Geneva-based Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, where we're asking what is the science that we should be doing now in order to address the problems of the future that we already know about. That's where we should be spending our time. Well, I've had the luxury of now thinking about stewardship. What do I do with all this experience? And I believe we have not done enough in equipping the majority with the tools for transforming our food systems. We've kept it in elite corridors, where unless you've got a degree from a university, University of Melbourne being one, you will not hear these conversations. But I believe we need more soldiers for this war. So let's create shared value. This is a term I've come across, developed by professors at the University of Harvard, where really what's good for you should be good for me, what's good for the planet should be good for my health, should be good for business, should be good for researchers, should be good for everybody. And let's create biohappiness, which is happiness derived from nature. How do we do it? I've highlighted what's good for you is good for me. I come from a continent where if you say private sector, we say cheats. They must be giving us ultra-processed foods. They must be taking away our money, making profit. But surely there is a break-even point. We can cohabit and do good for our planet. There are various ways in which we can create shared value and an evergreen revolution. So we are moving from sustainable food systems, the green revolution, to an evergreen one with biohappiness. What does that mean? Good nutrition, good and healthy environment, purposeful living, and social cohesion. Let me just take a turn and talk about how do we currently measure happiness. It was interesting to find that Australia has been demoted from the top 10. You are now 11th out of 147. I won't mention where my country is. It's right at the end. Yet I'm a very happy person. But if I were to ask you, Adelaide is the happiest of them all in Australia. Really? I've got a sister who lives in Adelaide, so I know what I'm talking about. But that's why I believe biohappiness should be our measure. When we see green, I was taken through your garden here, and I was happy thanks to Susan, who took me around this morning on a tour. If we used a recalibrated our happiness index and looked at green biohappiness, I'm sure we'd be happier. Let me now zero in on the role of universities in creating shared value. We are sitting on a jewel. Universities have spent a lot of time behind closed doors. This is the time to emerge and solve the world crisis. We are in an unhappy world, and the solutions lie with us. We can do all those things, but most important, we bring trust to the world because we have no vested political interests. So let's seize the opportunity. I am proposing a Caesar Sustainable Food Systems Academy. It's a food soldiers academy. This is an academy that will equip a new generation of practitioners with practical skills, interdisciplinary skills, to transform food systems in a sustainable way. Why now? We cannot transform food systems alone. When every human being is a stakeholder, we must make sure they are equipped with the know-how. What is the know-how and what will it do? We are really looking at the next generation. Young people who are graduating but have never had passion to be in agriculture, and yet we call them graduates. I took a tour around and asked people, why are you in agriculture? Why are you in animal science? They tell me they wanted to be vets, but they didn't make enough points, so they were demoted to agriculture. When they graduate, because agriculture is seen as farming, and yet we have the opportunity to unpack sustainable food systems, and when mentioned the name food, when we do that, it means everybody has a stake and we can improve that. So, being in Australia, I thought, let me look at what can we do. Let's unpack just the beef value chain. So many opportunities for people to come back to the profession of sustainable food systems and just do vocational training. We have done away with vocational courses and made straitjacket degrees in agriculture. You employ one of those in your farm, it's disaster because they've never touched a cow. Yet those who choose a vocation in agriculture will choose in sustainable food systems, will choose specific short courses that equip them for relevance for the profession. Just unpacking the beef value chain, which has been my job in the last 6 months, where I had the opportunity to be in Berlin and understood firsthand the German vocational training system. We lost it, we have to go back to it. Look at the opportunities of short courses we could be running. It's so difficult to find a worker with those skills because we've become jacks of all trades instead of masters of specific trades. For my continent in Africa, it will make our youth more employable. But more important, there will be intentionality in pursuing a career in agriculture and food systems. I want to believe Africa can do this with Australia's partnership, particularly on the beef value chain. Why? You are leaders in export-oriented beef production. You have the advanced technologies, but most important, you have the experience in dryland and tropical agriculture. Why not develop these short courses and partner with Africa in this journey? Africa is the youngest continent where by 2040, 1 in 3 persons in Africa will be the youth. And most important, currently they are unemployed. Can you imagine educated and unemployed? Recipe for disaster. Yet, we've churned them out of university and they've failed to find jobs in industry because we have not prepared them accordingly. Here is an opportunity for a new partnership for the world we want. My call to action is that the future of food cannot be built by a few experts for the many. It must be built by many, step by step, generation by generation, until the walls of hunger, of waste, and inequality finally fall. Back to my Jericho wall. The question for you is, what will you nourish? Will you nourish people or problems? How will you use your talent and your vocation to restore the planet? What legacy will you leave in sustainable food systems? Because you all have a stake. My advice to the upcoming generation: build institutions and trust the journey. Every step prepares you for leadership, and have purpose and courage and integrity. Never stop learning. Build partnerships and anchor your decisions on integrity. If I were to write a letter to my younger self and go back to the University of Alexandria in Egypt, I will embrace AI and digital, because that's the new world we are living in. I would also get into a profession where I understand that food systems connect to everything, and that there are other revolutions. We have a protein deficit at the moment that we are still fighting. But more important, anticipatory science will guide policy instead of politics. So it's important to be equipped with the tools. So we are all seeds of change. Let us cultivate a future where food nourishes people, nourishes ecosystems that thrive, and every person finds purpose in the sustainable food systems transformation journey. I'm sure we can do it, because we need to pass on a better planet to the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindiwe. That was absolutely fabulous. I'm sure the audience have got quite a few questions, but I'm going to give you a moment to actually catch your breath. And meanwhile, I'm going to take the opportunity to do a little bit of advertising. So this lecture has been recorded, and all of you who have registered, you will receive an email in the next couple of days. Please share it with your networks, share it with your family. I'm sure they will enjoy it. In the room, so now over to questions. We're going to alternate between in the room and actually online, and I can't see my online person. Thank you, over there, thank you. Right, let's start in the room. Do we have any questions in the room? Down the back.
Yeah. Some time ago, Walter Rodney wrote a book about how Europe underdeveloped Africa. So where do the processes of colonialization and capitalism fit into your analysis of food systems? Because food is big business, big profits, and there are some big agribusinesses that are devastating the planet.
Should I
Sure.
take it on? Thank you. Yeah, relevant question. I've been listening to Jeff Sachs, who gave an amazing public lecture at the University of Wits in South Africa during the G20 conference. And he speaks to exactly that, so I'll encourage you to look at that. If you look at development, 3 drivers. It's human capital, labor. That's how slavery provided the labor for those countries to develop. But they also had technology and capital. What has it done? It has left us with a continent, particularly for Africa, where we've got the labor, but we don't have the capital and we don't have the technologies. Who's got those is big business. When they establish presence in countries, we don't value add. We are exporting raw materials and therefore exporting jobs. We then leave our countries to follow those jobs, because those jobs are now in the developed countries where our raw materials are processed. But I'm happy to say that the new quest and drive now is value addition on the continent. The new policy, and there is the Africa Free Trade Agreement, AfCFTA, which is coordinating, at least breaking our boundaries whereby the tariffs between countries were higher than what we send outside, which is part of colonial legacy. Where your master is, they will get it for free, but between African countries, we tax each other high. If we break those boundaries, that will be the first start of knowing what's good for us. Second, producing what we eat. Part of colonialization was produce commodities, not food. What that meant is you will export your commodities, you'll get money and import the food. But what that has done is that the food that my grandmother fed me on to be a strong Zulu woman is no longer available because our international R&D centers were commodity driven. If you look at maize, wheat, rice, that's where we put all our investment. And yet the yams, the cassava, the millets didn't get much of. So it means the quality of seed that we produce is not developed. The yields are low. That is why we're still in the second agricultural revolution in Africa. We cannot even go into the next green revolution or leapfrog into the digital because we have not invested in R&D. So, as part of the journey for the loss and damage funds, because now we are facing climate change, our yields have been hit even harder. We are saying pay the loss and damage fund so that Africa and other less developed countries can follow a climate-smart trajectory in development where we use renewables and not fossil fuels, but most important, we can invest in infrastructure because our beds, even locally, are bad. We cannot move our commodities. 40% of what we farm is wasted at the farm gate before it even gets to the household. So it's a complex web of products or legacies of colonialization because only the roads that take produce to the ports are developed, yet the intra-marketing roads for a farmer 2 kilometers from the main road, by the time they get their tomatoes to the main road, 40% are broken and cannot be sold in the market. So back to your question is, Africa has woken up to that reality that first produce what you need, integrate Africa, light up Africa, because all of this will need a lot of energy. So use your renewables, but invest in energy. But most important, bring dignity to your people by providing jobs. The biggest challenge most politicians face now is unemployment of youth. That's a time bomb, and any solution on deck that can provide investment in creating jobs. And I believe agriculture has the answers, provided we improve our investments and deliver the technologies for value addition on the ground.
Excellent. Joe, do we have a question online?
Yes, we've got lots of great questions online. At the top of the list is, which emerging technology or innovation gives you the most hope for transforming global food systems?
All right, which emerging technology? I've said we're in a digital world, and the problem is there's no magic bullet. There's no one technology. We are talking of technology bungles now. Because we've been left behind so much, we need to bungle our technologies. But I'll tell you one big game changer that you wouldn't have thought about. It is the issue of solar energy, which would have been no-brainer because my continent has a lot of sun. You'd have thought we would be the leaders in generating energy from the sun. But solar energy and internet connectivity, amazing game changer. I run a farm, and I can tell you, after many years of struggling to drive to get to the farm, then run back to the city, 2-hour drive to go and pick up a 30-minute call and drive back, I can now, through Starlink, one good thing that's come out of there, no advertisement, but just to say, give credit where it belongs, and solar energy. At a click of a button, I'm in touch with the farm, I can talk to them, I can see what they're doing. Can you imagine what that's done? For 1/10 the price of what I used to pay for not even counting the transport for just connectivity from the city. We've been able to reach rural schools and boost up science, STEM education in rural schools, all because you have light and you have internet connectivity. And what has that got to do with agriculture? We can't go digital in agriculture. You can't run that chameleon irrigation without connectivity. So for me, that's been the big game changer. If you thought I would say seed, no, we start from outside. We still need good roads, so hopefully that's coming.
Questions in the room? There's one over here.
You mentioned about Aboriginal agriculture in the beginning of your lecture, and we know that they've been practicing sustainable agriculture since a long time ago. And my question is, how can we support and promote Aboriginal sustainable agriculture in this technological era development?
Okay, so I talked about 4 revolutions. The 4th one is where we are really talking sustainability. And I think it's important to always unpack sustainability. We live in a world of either or. If you look at the 3rd revolution, it was driving quantity. So it was in the triangle of economics, social, and environment. It was economics, quantity. You know, we're breeding seeds that gave us 10, 15, 20 tons per hectare. We forgot about the environment, what that was doing to the soil. We also forgot about the social angle of sustainability, which was the health of the people. So it's not always correct to say previous revolutions were driving sustainability. We woke up to the reality of we were driving the apex of the triangle and forgot other things. Now we have to bring the whole puzzle together, and that's what's making it complicated. We're saying less profit, but optimum profit. Don't be extractive. We're saying a healthy planet and healthy people. And there's no Ministry of Sustainability. So it means all of us have to make it happen. When we breed our seeds, we no longer say we want a 10-ton yield seed. We'll say what will it do to the environment and how will it nourish people. If it doesn't do it, let's fortify. But that lens of sustainability should drive development, not the extractive quantity revolution that we ran in the 3rd agriculture revolution, which was the green revolution. Yeah?
Joe, questions?
We've got so many great questions online. We can only answer one more, sorry. But at the top of the list is from Alex. Should we focus on uplifting and promoting smallholder farmers or promoting large-scale commercial operations? How do we find a middle way?
Thank you, Alex, for that question. I just said we live in a world of either or. Should we kill this one and raise this one? Why can't we cohabit? We complement each other. And I think we should be driven by the outcome we desire. There are things that a large-scale farm can do that a smallholder can do better. But remember here, we are not talking about quantity, which is where this issue of who should lead. Those who drive economy will say they want quantity from the large farm because it's got the economies of scale. But a smallholder farmer will tell you we don't just farm so that we produce maize or what. We farm because this is our livelihood, this is our way of life, this is our biohappiness. So let's put this into context and say let's cohabit and find a win-win as long as we tick the box on sustainability. What do we want to do? We desire to make sure we protect the planet and nourish our bodies and the planet and feed our pockets. How do we make that happen? I was raised on a smallholder farm where my grandmother would have 9, 10 crops on her 1 hectare plot. And that plot fed not just her 8 children and 25 grandchildren, but it sustained us the whole year. We then removed all the diversity and went for maize because the commodity price, not food price of maize, had gone up, and we thought we would get money for school fees, grandma will be able to be rich. What happened? The soil is damaged because we've removed the crop rotation, the prices collapsed, and we're back to poverty. Now, most African countries, people are carrying food from the city to the farms. Yet, during my time, it was the other way around. We went to the farm 3 times a year during school holidays, and we brought all the food that we ate in the city. Now, it's not done, and that damage is difficult to reverse. So let them cohabit, but let's break the puzzle. Let's make sure it's sustainable economically, socially, and environmentally.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for questions. I'm sure there are many more. The people in the room, I encourage you to continue the conversation. We're now going to get a little bit of an ad for something good that's coming up next week as well. I mean, it's a bit of a smorgasbord at the moment. So if you're hungry for more of public lectures, we have a very special lecture coming up next week as well. And in 2009, Elizabeth Blackburn became the first Australian woman to receive a Nobel laureate when she won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for her contributions to the understanding of telomerase and the enzyme telomerase, which protects chromosomes from degrading. A week from today, we'll be honoured to host Elizabeth as she presents her lecture entitled The Science Behind Ageing, Cells, Stress and the Power of Connection. I do hope that you can also join us for that public lecture next Tuesday. There should be a link that's appeared up there. That's where you can, if you scan that, you'll be able to sign on. But it's now time to close this event, to say particular thanks to Lindiwe again, and to thank everybody in the room who joined us, and also everyone who joined us online. For those in the room, I invite you to join us in the foyer for some refreshments and further conversation. But before we enjoy that drink and snack, I would again like to give my appreciation deeply for this lecture. So please join me in expressing a great thanks to Lindiwe for her wonderful words and everything she does to benefit the world. Thank you very much.